Hi, welcome to the ABBA, the first live stream. This is a bit exciting, we've not done this before. Welcome to all our new members for British Botanical Artist, and welcome to those of you who've been with us from the start. It's lovely to have us all together, and it's lovely to be able to talk to you. My name's Elaine, and this evening I'm going to talk to you about what is botanical art. What do I need to know about botanical art before I start? And how much do I actually need to know in terms of the terminology? So let's start off by looking at the plants themselves that we're going to illustrate with tonight. And then we'll have a look at the bits and pieces you need to have a proper view of them. This evening I'm going to use a native plant, and the native plant I've chosen is one that I weed out of the garden in some areas and I let grow in others. So I'm going to look at Geranium robertianum, and that actually has quite a few different forms, but because it is Geranium robertianum, it has key features of the species, and so it doesn't matter how it looks. When you drill right down, it is the same plant. So this is one that is growing in gravel. You can see this one's quite small, and it's also very red. You can see very clearly the taproot, and then you can see the little fibrous roots that come off that taproot. This is a species that's really good in drought conditions. It's able to gather water. I mean, this was growing in gravel on a drive that gets driven over. However, there's another, the same species, but this is one that's growing underneath the hedge where it gets a lot of water off the wall. Look at the size. So size isn't an indication of whether it's the right species or not. And look at the colour. You've still got the red, but it's not as pronounced as it is in that plant which is under drought conditions. To start off with, I just want us to look at one that was a biggish plant, but I cut the bits and pieces off. We'll go down and we'll have a look at this on the paper, and I'll show you the bits and pieces that we use to investigate plants. Okay, so what I've got here are bits and pieces that are useful but not absolutely necessary. I've got a really good hand lens, which is excellent at magnifying small parts. I've got another hand lens that's very useful to take out into the field. That's really good because you can stick it in your pocket or put it in your backpack. Anne Gerling, one of our members, also suggested this honescope. I hope that's not shining, that you can fit onto your digital camera phone, and that will magnify the parts of the plant. To be able to pull the bits of the plant apart, this is a needle set onto a piece of wood, a piece of doweling. I use a dissecting needle, which actually came out of my old dissection kit. Hang on, let me blow those bits off. It's annoying. And then I also use, and I find these are probably the most important, I have fine forceps. You can do this with, you can pull parts of the plant apart with ordinary forceps, but the finer the better. To cut it into pieces, I use fairly fine scissors. Again, having been a botanist, I tend to have all these bits and pieces around at home. To cut it, I can also use an ordinary craft knife or a really nice Swan Morton blade. Okay, let's have a think about the plant. Tonight we started off with a simple flower. But although we're going to look at a simple flower, I want you to have a look at the parts of the native plant that I've chosen. To show you the flower parts, however, I am going to use a cultivated geranium. So again, we've got the taproot with the fibrous roots at the side. Now these were spread way across the gravel. As you can see, they're really long, so they collect all the moisture available. But it's also got quite a strong taproot, which would store some of the water. Then if you look here, you've got bracts and leaves. So the leaves come off alternately. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whoops, 6. No, I've gone down again, 6. So they come off in a spirally whirl. It's not easy to see that once the leaves and stems. Some of these bigger bits were flower stems. And you can see from this how hairy the plant is. And so that I could show you close up, we actually photographed it against a black background. Now this makes it easier to see, and I've only chosen 2 parts of the plant for this. This is the underside of the leaf. I chose the underside because it shows the venation, the veins, better. You can see how glabrous it is, how many hairs are on here. These are all glandular hairs. There are a few less of them on the main lamina, but it's still very hairy. This is another adaptation for drought tolerance. And you can see that on the underside, this one's quite red. So the colour is quite variable. And that's something to bear in mind if you're painting. Look really carefully at the structures. How do the veins split here? So this one is split into 3. And then you get little leaflets coming off this main section. Over here we've got the flower, and again you can see that the flower stem is really hairy with the glandular hairs. And there are 2 flowers on each of these stems. They have a little stipule here that each of the pedicels come off, the little bits that hold the flower up. So I'll put that to one side. Now what I'm going to do is to take one of the cultivated geranium flowers. This is a geranium that grows in the garden. I don't know which geranium it is. And each geranium has 2 flower heads at the top. And I'm going to use my scissors and I'm going to take this one off. Oops. So here's a single flower. And at the base you've got 2 little, they usually come in pairs, 2 little pairs of stipules that are at the base of this very tiny pedicel. That's the little bit that holds the flower up. Here it is. It's tiny. It's just here. It's very short. On some they are very long, but on these they're short. Now, what makes this a simple flower rather than a complex one? Well, it's simple because it's completely radially symmetrical. What do I mean by that? I mean that it doesn't matter where you cut this across here, it will be symmetrical on both sides. Another word for that in botanical terms is actinomorphic. Okay. Now what I didn't talk to you about at the front is, do I need to know all these botanical terms? Well, the answer to that question is actually in the simplistic form, no. However, if you want to be able to identify your plant and ensure it is a native plant you're drawing, yeah, it's a really good idea to get to terms with the nomenclature. And once you start to look at your plant and actually really observe, you'll realize that you can't rely on photographs alone. Photographs provide you with an aide-memoire, but to rely on them completely means that you can't actually see from here. I can't see exactly where this bit relates to that, or how this joins onto there. Now, a lot of plants you can't pick, and I'm very aware of that. So there has to be a balance between photographing and observing in the field. If you can, it's nice to be able to take 1 or 2 flowers home and maybe a leaf, but you cannot get away from the fact that observation is key. Okay, my simple flower, I'm going to put this one aside for the moment, but I'm going to come back to that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the parts off the flower in order from the back. Now, I'm going to hold on to this little stem, and I'm going to start taking the stipules off, the sepals off. Here we go. Oops. 1. So this very simple flower has got 5 sepals. Oops, just broken the... I'm going to hold it here, actually. Oh, I knew this was going to be tricky. It's difficult when your hands are shaking. I don't usually shake as much as this. I must be nervous or something. Why would that be? There we go. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to work my way in from the outside so I really get to know what's going on. 4, 5. Right, put those down. Now I'm going to put those in an order like this. That one's a bit curly, so it'll just have to sit curly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now these are really quite simple structures. They're ovate and they have a little horn at the top, a little tiny sharp point. And I've just knocked a little anther off, but we'll come back to that one. They are not attached to each other. These are quite free. And in this simple flower, it's one of the simplest structures you can get. Now we'll take the petals off. Again, there's 5, and they're completely free. They sit at the base of the ovary. We'll have a look at that in a minute. 1, 2. And the sepals actually come out in between them, and they're in whorls. So 3. Oh, hang on. You got stuck. Oh, no. I got a bit stuck here. I've got my forceps stuck in a petal. I might not have them in exactly the right order. I've just knocked all the anthers off, as you will see, but we'll put them back together again in a second. 3. Knock that one off the end of my forceps. 4. And the last one, 5. Okay, 2 halves, 4 1/2, 5. Things work much better when you're not on camera, don't they? There we go. Ooh. Oh, nearly. So they're all the right way up. You can see from these that the petals have a deep dip in the top, and they have a claw at the bottom. This is where the nectar is. Now this is, as I told you, is a cultivated geranium. If, however, I bring the Robertianum in and I pull one of its petals off, break it in half again, hang on, you'll see that the sepal, oh dear, sepal's about the same size. I should have done a Blue Peter on this, shouldn't I? There we go. Sepals are similar in shape. It's got the awn at the top, but the petal in this case isn't lobed at the top. So in the native species, it's completely entire at the top. There's no lobing. Now, in terms of the number of everything, there's 5 petals. There's 5 sepals on the outside, 5 petals inside that. And noting the way that the venation is on the petals is important. So for each one of these petals in the geranium, there tend to be 2 of the stamens and stigmas. So the next bit in are the stamens that have the anther, which is this little tiny, here's the filament, and there's the anther on top, and that makes up the stamen. So there's 10 of those. So I'm going to just take those off because I'll show you one I did earlier, which would be much easier. This is the other flower because I wanted you, on the geranium, the anthers release pollen first, followed by the stigmas becoming receptive to pollen. So on the one that we had originally, the anthers were ripe, but you'll see that the stigmas are still folded up. The stigmas are this little bit at the top here, and to show you that without knocking all this to pot, I'll show you a photograph I took, and here's the stigmas, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's one just cheeking down the back, 5. They're united at the base into one style, which goes down into fused ovaries. Now the ovary on this is above where the flower parts come out. So all of the flower parts come off around here. And that type of ovary that sits on top of receptacle is called a superior ovary. These here that you can see, they're the filaments, and the anthers have already fallen off. The anthers and filaments make up the stamens, which are the male part of the plant. The stigmas and the style and the ovary make up the female part of the plant and are called carpels, but the whole thing together, the male and female part of the plant. So this is a plant that has male and female parts. What I do when I'm photographing things, and you'll probably know, you'll see those on the blog post. We're putting out a blog post to go with this. When I'm photographing and I'm out in the field, I often put my wedding ring next to what I photograph. I do that because it's one thing I always carry. I know the size of it, and it means that I can use this sort of setup to tell me images and sizes. However, I did leave it up a tree on a golf course, having climbed up a ladder, so I had to run back and collect it. Now, when I've finished doing something like this, I then tend to write on it. and I would do something similar for the leaves. So again, this was an immature, whoops, where's my pointy stick? This is an immature female part with the stigmas all together. So I photographed something similar to the one I showed you earlier, and I've written on this. I've added notes, I've added the proper terms. Now this is geranium, okay? The geranium that you put in your garden, that you plant out, it's in the same family as this. So within the plants you've got the families, and this one's Geraniaceae. You've got the genus, and in this case it's geranium. But for the one you plant out, which doesn't have the same flower structure, that's the pelargonium. And so that's this pelargonium species. Now within a genus, you can have several different species. There's one genus that comes to mind that only has one species, which is Ginkgo biloba. But in most, there are more than one. So this is a cultivar. It's not the native, because the native was rather small. I find being able to do this really useful. What else did I need to tell you? Oh yes, I know what I didn't tell you. The stigmas are the bit that accept pollen. The anthers are the bit that release pollen. It is useful to note whether the anthers are ripe before the stigma. Obviously, that one should be out here. This one should be in here, because this one's got ripe anthers, but not ripe stigmas. So if you were drawing it, you wouldn't want to put these at the same time. So there are a few things you need to know. I think that's probably enough for our first live stream. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, I'd really love to be able to do you a series which would look at more complex flowers, composite flowers that are not simple like this. But if you do have any questions, have a look at the blog posts that will be released tomorrow, and do send in emails. Thank you very much for joining us on ABBA TV.